to pause. We pause for a second or two. This is episode 103, Story Unfolding. In our relationships, we are in the same story. We are different people. You are you, and I am me. But we are in the same story. The story of our traction. Our story of our symmetry. And as we go along on our story, as we take our steps, as we say what we say, as we do what we do, we are going forward and driving the same interesting story. What we are listening for, what we are sensitive to, is the story feeling familiar, the story feeling somewhat new, but above all, the story feeling interesting. Today's episode is called Story Unfolding. And the Polaroid, the specific skill for today's episode is listening. And listening is part of our worn out situation. As we listen for our story feeling interesting. We listen for traction when we feel like there is traction between us and together we are walking along the line of our shared story. And in a story, there are major events. There are events when the plot drives forward, or something is driving the plot forward. There are these major moments, and there are also periods of time of little or no action. periods of time of waiting. And as we are taking each step on our shared story, we are listening for traction. We are listening for what is it time for now? Is it time for moving forward? Is it time for waiting? Or is it time for taking a step back? All of these are part of our story. They are all needed. Sometimes, in order for something key to happen, we need to have a long time of seemingly nothing happening. Sometimes we feel that there are so much happening, but it is beneath the surface, it is inside. There is motion, but it's not visible yet. Things are finding their places, but it is not visible right now. It's not time for it right now. Story unfolding. Some parts of our story lines up with other people's stories. Sometimes a critical step is taken together with many other people taking a similar or the same step. Sometimes a step we are taking for traction in our shared story is in the exact opposite direction of everybody else. Sometimes our story takes us to a completely lonely place where there is only us for a while. Sometimes our story feels completely unfamiliar and we feel left to something else, left to someone else, like we are not in charge, like our story is driving us forward rather than us driving the story forward. At other times, we find ourselves highly influential, that we have influence over other people's stories, that we are the driving force behind others. In these turbulent times we are living in right now, there are countless of stories unfolding all at the same time. They are coming and going, they are affecting each other, they are inspired by one another, they distance themselves from one another. At some point they become very similar to one another, and at other points they seem to have nothing in common. At some points in our shared story, we take a great leap of faith. And afterward, after our leap, great amounts of energy is released. More energy than we know what to do with. And we are overwhelmed by what are we to make of all of this. And we cannot really find constructive use for all of it. At other points, we are depressed. Nothing seems to be happening. We seem to come close to despair. That the outlook seems bleak. That options are taken away from us. That windows that used to be open, close. That people we used to share traction with, share symmetry with, disappear. There are high points, there are low points. Our story has a pulse. Our story has a pulse. And when we stay in touch, listening for this pulse of our story, of our relationship, then we feel traction, then we see symmetry, then we are in it. We are living our story, truly living it. At some points, our story feels rational. It feels like it is abiding to certain laws, certain trends, certain knowledge. At other times, our story takes off and creates new senses of logic unknown to us. And all throughout this, there is a difference between the story we can tell about what has been and the story as we are living it right now, as we are being agents, active agents in our stories in the here and now. That is something else. And specific skill listening is about attuning ourselves to that agency right now, to feel that we are in our story developing right now, to be present, to even enjoy it, to try things, to taste it, to make mistakes, and see that our story can harbor our mistake. That our mistake is sometimes small and sometimes big, but always part of our story. Sometimes we hear ourselves saying something we haven't thought about for years or never have thought about. Sometimes something truly shocking appears from us. Sometimes we shock ourselves. And at those moments, our story becomes very much alive. It's a very living thing. Sometimes passionate, and sometimes more moderate. Going forward now, in the times to come, there will be far too many stories to follow, all of them. Far too many. Countless upon countless of stories going on, all at the same time. So here it takes some presence of mind, some detail-oriented thinking to make out what stories are the most important ones to follow. 1, 2, 3 stories maybe. The most important stories to follow. The most important tractions, symmetries to be present with right now. Because the pace will quicken. Many things will accelerate now. So making out which stories are the most important is key. And then just listening as those few stories are unfolding as they are supposed to do. That's it for today. Thank you.